Welcome once again to our second episode of In Conversation with the BIM Community Africa. Tonight I have a very special panel together to really talk about the state of construction, both pre-COVID and what needs to happen afterwards. As a method of introduction, I'm just going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their favorite treat during the COVID-19 lockdown. Let's start with Sean. Over to you.
Hi everyone, this is Sean Godoy. Thanks a lot for having me and for BIM Community for arranging it. I think this is a great platform. So my name is Sean. I am an independent property consultant and I work mainly with property investors and developers, offering a range of advisory services, and also do a lot of training and skills development in the industry. And then I am also quite involved in PropTech as a commentator, and I've done a bit of research in South Africa and further afield in Africa as well. And my favorite treat, I guess it's hard to pick one because I guess you kind of substitute social contact and a lot of things with eating, but I'm quite a snacker, so I guess it's nuts and biltong for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean. Ginika.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ginika Egwuonwu, and I am a construction consultant, and I have been in the industry for about a decade. Started off as a QS, then transitioned to project management, and finally went off into solving problems for construction-related businesses. And when I say solving problems, just finding ways of making construction projects and construction businesses more profitable, as well as encouraging the use of technology in this industry. When it comes to my favorite treats during lockdown, I will definitely say just eating everything. I don't know if that's a good thing because I don't know if many people will be able to recognize me when lockdown has been lifted up.
Nick, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nick Taylor. I come from a construction background. I now provide construction consulting services, specializing on 3D model quantity takeoffs, 5D model-based estimating, and 4D scheduling. My favorite snack during this time has been Kit Kat.
Great, it's our African staple. Richard?
Hey everyone, Richard Matchett here. I'm a civil engineer and a very enthusiastic biker. I'm also a drone pilot, and my job involves influencing the way my company does digital. I have a very keen interest in digital twins and what that might be doing for the construction industry and also for asset management on a big scale. So really keen to hear this conversation. I'm a chocoholic, so no guesses there.
And Vere?
Hey, hi everyone. I am Vere Shaba, and I'm a mechanical engineer who specializes in high performance green buildings. So that's a building that performs better in terms of energy, water, and waste. And I've been in the industry since 2010 and really fortunate to have done quite a bit of work in 10 African countries. In terms of my favorite treat, it's not actually food because, I mean, I've been eating breakfast for lunch and dinner, and you can do whatever you want during this time. But I love that I've been able to just log into webinars about absolutely everything from knitting to cooking to anything that I ever want to know. There's just been a webinar about it. So that for me has been a treat, just learning absolutely random things.
Fantastic. And Patrick?
Yeah, hello everyone. Patrick Katabua. I'm a property practitioner, primarily representing occupiers of space. The majority of my work is done outside South Africa, so I represent the African region. And prior to moving on to consulting and advisory, I was in property finance, also very Africa focused. And I'm a keen Saturday morning tennis player, so I really miss that. And my favorite snack has been cheese and olives right through the day.
Oh, fantastic. And Andrew?
Hi, everybody. Not sure what I'm doing here because I'm from facilities management, which is the tail end of the BIM cycle currently. I'm one of those guys that the construction team throw the keys over their shoulder as they walk away from the building and say, there we go, this is yours now. I'm an independent FM consultant. I was calculating the other day, I've been in the built environment for 34 years. Firstly, as a building surveyor, looking after heritage buildings, as you would call them in South Africa, listed buildings as we used to call them in the UK. Worked on buildings that are over 900 years old, so it's quite interesting. Then went to the new end of did project management, and now I'm in FM, which is somewhere in the middle. Yeah, my favorite thing over lockdown, I discovered Moroccan wine.
Oh, wow.
Because, you know, when you've drunk every bottle in the house and that's all you're left with. Moroccan wine, as I've got a quick slurp here now.
Oh, fantastic.
There we
I
go.
think you make a whole bunch of us jealous tonight with that Moroccan wine. So diving right into it, McKinsey in 2015 published a construction productivity imperative worldwide. And the data there showed that 98% of large projects have overrun, and on average that at least 20 months over schedule and 80% over the original budget. We've also seen recently that the decimation of the South African listed construction sector is continuing, with construction and engineering company ESAW confirming that it will be delisting from the JSE. The announcement by ESAW Business Rescue Practitioners follows, former construction heavyweight Group 5 and property at Memorial Park developer Calgro M3, confirming this week that its decision to also close their construction division, resulting in retrenchment of about 150 employees. We also see that COVID-19 crisis has been rapidly reshaping the what and how of digital transformation. I think most of us have seen the meme around, who led digital transformation in your company. But when we look at IT spend in construction, we see a huge underinvestment. According to a JB Knowledge and Construction Technology report, the average IT spend as a percentage of revenue in other industries is between 3 and 5%. And almost half of the construction industry currently worldwide, not just in South Africa, spends less than 1%. And only about 8.2% of construction companies worldwide are above the benchmark from other industries. So with that being said, and as a backdrop, I'd like to ask Nick, what do you believe were some of the problems that we had in the construction industry even before COVID?
Jay, I think you can't just put it into one box, but there's various problems. And the bottom line for everybody is return on investment for any company, any industry, what you do. And it's all about what you do, where you do it, and when you do it, and the coordination of all of that. And one of the driving factors is obviously workload. So from a tender base or procuring work, and the declining markets or the number of tenders that can get put out, slowly but surely your workload starts drying up, which has an effect on your cash flow. It's money in, money out, and your resources then needs to be reviewed. And often in the industry, what happens is the first thing that the resources that get pulled or stopped is your technology spend. And, I come from a very dynamic estimating methods and planning department where the minute something went wrong, we started cutting down on software and things like that. And people get redeployed and your departments get broken up from one dynamic unit into business units. You continuously have to adopt and try new strategies. I mean, you just look at what we're sitting in and now. We used to be on site or in the office. Now we're operating from home. We adapt, we make things work. Some of us are fortunate to have the technology and the means to do that. But there's a myriad of reasons, and it affects the whole value chain. The way tenders are put out, the way tenders are reduced, the documentation, the format, etc. Money in, money out in terms of your certificates, paying subcontractors or not paying your subbies and suppliers on time. It has a negative effect throughout the industry. And obviously dealing with a lot of government projects where payments are delayed, it has a huge impact on your capacity as a business to operate.
Ginika, anything from your side?
Hi, yes, I agree with Nick. I just apologize if I fade in and out of this conversation. It seems like my connection is a bit touch and go. But I do agree with Nick in terms of saying that there were a multiple or several factors that the industry faced before the whole pandemic. And I would like to say that one of the factors that I would like to add on to what he said is just in terms of, and I would also like Patrick to tell us from a front end perspective, because he tends to deal with the clients or the owners of projects before it gets to the construction industry. He's more on the property planning side, if I can categorize it that way. But one of the problems I think the industry faced was just tight, in general, just the economy, the downturn in South Africa's economy. I read a report that said the construction industry had contracted in terms of our output with regards to, or in comparison to the previous year. The construction industry was already on a downturn or producing less than previous years. So from a recession point of view, I think it's just in terms of the economy in general not doing so well. That has led to certain big players in the industry closing up. In more favorable economic positions, I do think that we wouldn't have had so many construction companies closing down. And we know that construction as an industry is one of the biggest players or contributors to the global GDP, and the same reflects here in South Africa. Construction plays a significant role in South Africa's GDP, but because as a whole, the country was already in a recession, I think that led to some of the examples that you listed.
Okay. Patrick, any comment on that?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I agree with the comments that have been raised thus far. And I think pre-COVID, a classic challenge which developers and construction companies faced was that the owners of properties, the developers would typically build a lot more than what the market requires to take advantage of economies of scale. However, if it's not built right, it means that it would lead to a lot of variation orders and adjustments and refurbishments before an occupier moves in, which would obviously then make developments a lot more costly than anticipated. So I think that's a challenge which was already present before COVID. And this pandemic is going to force us to change how buildings look, feel, and operate even further, meaning there's a lot more construction spend that may need to occur. So it's quite a delicate situation that we had pre-COVID already. I think the developers who built with an occupier in mind will have a reduced level of adjustment to do in comparison to those who built based on the size of their wallet.
And the next one is over to you, Richard. You know, we talk about, Patrick mentioned the fact that we had, when it's not built right, and the increase in variation orders, et cetera, is that not built right specifically due to a skills gap that we have in the construction industry, or are we looking at a disconnect between construction and the design partners?
So I'm gonna dodge that one and approach it slightly differently, Jay.
Perfect.
So just thinking about, you know, the industry and, you know, this is the BIM community podcast. I mean, we're talking about building things right, and obviously the way things are planned and designed comes into it. I sit back and I think, well, what are some of the things that were pre-COVID and maybe pre-2020, pre-2019 even? Our industry is one of those that doesn't like changing, period. And I think that unless there's a massive shift from the outside, change generally doesn't happen. What we're seeing with COVID is it's suddenly provided this massive leverage to force people to change and to start thinking about needing to do something different. I think it's incredibly sad what's happened to the industry in the last, 5 years, I'd say. And there's a number of different factors. Wastage on sites and building things wrong or right. I don't think those are very new problems. But I think what's interesting is the potential solutions, or the possible solutions that are now available to us. Those are new, and those are very, very different. And I'm interested to observe what, the situational differences due to lockdown and the stoppages, piled on top of our economy going for a tank. Those are what's really forcing innovation and forcing people to do something different. So notwithstanding all those other things that are definitely, traditional issues, right now, there's an opportunity and a crisis, and the two of those together have to make something happen.
Definitely, and that sort of leads us into the next segue is, what now for the industry? We got government pushing out a $500 billion stimulus package, and looks like mainly that they want to drive construction of public infrastructure, and it looks also like hospitals will be, if you had to read between the lines in the president's speech. What now? What opportunities exist for us to take things forward, looking at both the challenges and the technology that lies there? Sean, if I can ask you from a prop tech perspective, what do you see?
Sure, thanks, Jay. I think going forward, just listening to all the comments, I agree across the board. I think sort of taking a step back, just as a sort of like the property economy sort of perspective in the property market. Obviously, a lot of the issues, I think, for construction were, driven by sort of a very rocky economic period we've had, and obviously now that's been exacerbated. So I think on the whole, we've obviously got a very robust industry, and in terms of the sort of the property landlord market, we've got a lot of good assets in the market, and I think a good history of developing and managing assets. So that's something definitely to look at, but it all comes down to that sort of demand from the user at the end of the day. And if anything, a lot of markets are oversupplied in terms of office space and retail space due to changing trends and obviously tough economic conditions. So sort of at the moment, what's interesting obviously is a lot of property sectors like retail and office, things are changing dramatically, and there's mixed opinions, but it's likely to lead to sort of a need for less space across the board. So what that means for new development, that obviously the tap might be turned off for a little while, but a lot of it depends obviously on how we're going to use our space. And I think the management of the existing space will become quite important. And then there's been arguments where social distancing might actually increase, the need for space, say in the office environment. So some people are saying it'll level out, but it's difficult. I mean, I don't think there'll be a lot of new space coming onto the market. And just I think from the prop tech perspective in this sort of, on this topic in terms of impacts of COVID going forward, I think the way we manage and interact with buildings obviously will change in various ways. So I think there's a lot of technology that's already been available and maybe hasn't been adopted for various reasons in terms of perhaps remote property management tools, platform-enabled management of smart buildings. So seeing more automation in buildings, and obviously there'll be a big emphasis on non-touch, experiences moving in and around spaces. So just at a high level, I think at this point, it's obviously just about how we're going to interact with our spaces, and technology can really help, I think, with how we manage the actual building, and then obviously the sort of the maybe perhaps tracking movements of people and seeing where sort of high volume areas are, etc., and analyzing risks. So just as a high level for now, I think that's how I see it.
Fantastic, Sean, and I think that leads us into another nice rabbit hole. Before we go down that rabbit hole, Ginika, you said you wanted to pop in and make a comment.
Yes, I also just wanted to add on to what Sean has said, and in terms of what I also believe were problems the industry faced before the pandemic. And one of that is construction tech, which is very similar to what he's saying, but he's speaking from a property angle, prop tech. I think I remember reading a study that did say that the construction industry was one of the least adopters of technology, with agriculture being the least. So, and this also touches on what Andrew spoke about in terms of saying that the industry is just generally slow to change or transformation or reforms. So definitely the adoption of technology into our processes was one of the problems that we had, and that is something that I guess I should probably wait for you to prompt that. That is something that we are seeing as a glaring issue right now during the pandemic, to show just how much technology we have adopted in general. So what can we do and what can't we do in terms of using the existing technology that we have as an industry in general, or as a whole in the industry? Sorry.
Very, very true, Ginika. What's your sort of take on the fact that we now being forced to social distance, being forced to look at new ways of working remotely in an industry that is traditionally quite labor intensive? How are we going to apply tech in this industry, and so what opportunities do you think exist?
Thank you for that question. I completely agree with what all of the panelists have said so long. I think there was quite a few challenges pre-pandemic, if you look at it just from a green property and a green buildings perspective. When you look at the definition of a green building, that looks at a building that performs 20% better in terms of energy, 20% better in terms of water, and 20% better in terms of waste. And all of that has to do with performance. And a lot of the times what would see is that the green buildings kind of sector and the green economy would not incorporate technology as much as we should have. And because of that, I think that there was always a disconnect, and green buildings was always an additional line item, as opposed to being integrated into how the mechanical engineer designed or the electrical engineer designed. And so some of the opportunities that I see happening now post-pandemic, first of all, is that I think that from a CapEx and OpEx perspective, a lot more property developers are going to want to spend more. They have to, because we will, there's a lot of predictions of there being a recession coming up post-pandemic, and there will be a little bit of financial distress. And if you look at that, a green building is one that has to perform, it means that we foresee that a lot more property developers, if they look at the real definition of green, which is not about certification, it's about performance, then I think that a lot more property developers are going to start looking into what globally is being referred to as a green recovery. And what the green recovery just says is, how do we now start to incorporate a lot of the green building measures and green construction, green maintenance measures in how we operate our buildings? And also, because the green recovery is quite tied to a lot of these stimulus packages that are coming, including from the International Monetary Fund, where they've been saying that they're willing to give out all of these, bailouts to help companies, but that might be tied to their green credentials. And so it's kind of this nexus between the economy, green, and technology, and trying to see, because you can't really have a green building without technology. So trying to see how all of that will kind of come out after the pandemic, I think, is an opportunity. So just the green economy and understanding that the green economy can't exist without tech and can't exist without BIM, and how all of that links to some of the additional money that's coming in that has a green credential term and condition assigned to it.
Definitely. Sean?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, great comments from Ginika and Vere. I just wanted to jump in on that. I think you raised a very important point, Vere. Is basically comes back to something that came up at one of the BIM conferences that I went to, which was really great, which is silos in the industry. So obviously the sort of, I guess, the built environment value chain from design to construction, handover and management. I think those historically we've said tend to operate in silos, which makes it difficult to obviously get meaningful integration and adoption for some of the technologies, I suppose. And what you said was really interesting. Like you said, there's the tech, the green building, and the economy. And I think even those are thought of in isolation sometimes. So just as a broad comment, I think like a more holistic approach to what people are trying to achieve is important, I think, because green building, prop tech, and then con tech, construction tech, and then obviously things involved in the design stage, they can all really feed through and sort of feed in and assist each other and sort of add more value if things are thought about earlier or adopted sooner in the process. So, you rather than retrofitting with green building, that should be in like initial thoughts at the beginning of the process. And the same with prop tech interventions in terms of, managing a building on a digital platform. You need certain physical items to be installed, like sensors, etc. The same with green building. You've got to think of how a building will operate, to get the maximum out of those features. And then obviously BIM itself is a great example of that, because it really starts, at the seed stage of a project. If it's adopted, then it can be carried through right to the management and facilities management, which obviously, and that's Andrew's area. But that's just, I think, a really important comment, and just also being aware of the economic factors. So there might be someone, as a BIM consultant or green building consultant, and perhaps you also, it's easy to get into your silo, but it's important to understand the value chain, and then also the economy you're playing in, and sort of the challenges and opportunities in that as well.
Great, and thank you, Sean. And that sort of leads me to a question for Andrew. I mean, I speak to plenty of people in the industry, and when we talk about green buildings, the response I'm sort of getting is, yes, it's very nice, but as soon as they realize that they have to pay more for service that help them get a green building, and that the facilities management around the green building is also a bit more complicated than your normal environment. How does that impact you guys, Andrew?
Thanks, Jay. One thing I just want to go back on something. I think the interesting thing here is we're all talking about the crisis of COVID. That's a problem that's here and now, and it's a crisis, but it might be a very short-lived crisis. And we're talking about very permanent solutions here. We're not necessarily looking at the problem of adaptation, which is the sustainability and environmental crisis, which talks to the green thing. So I think it is the crisis of the moment, but it's potentially not the existential crisis that sustainability is. And we are the most indoor generation of all time. And with 40% of the world's carbon being produced by our buildings, all of us are responsible in some way, shape or form for potentially saving the planet. But in terms of green, and I'm not sure of the argument, and I'm really not the person to talk about whether you pay more for green. But yes, it certainly does make it slightly more complex. But I think, you know, BIM potentially, which is what we hear, or the common thread that runs through everything, BIM is there, and I think goes hand in hand with things or processes like soft landings that makes that that transition from the design and build part of the life cycle to the operate part of the life cycle. And I know that Jay will have a jibe at me again for mentioning this idea that you guys, you know, you construct the building and then you walk away from it, and we're left hoping to manage it with 80% of the cost. You know, it's interesting that construction is it's unlike any other production environment. That it's fraught with a lack of cooperation amongst the team that build it, and takes no account or very little account of the cost of operating it. And I think the green element is one of those things that has knitted us together, and that is now the standard and should be the standard. But does the building continue to perform? And is the design team who are responsible effectively for putting that unit of production on the planet, they walk away from it, are they going to be responsible for how that building performs down the line? I think, you know, the facilities managers, they're operating it, but we many times haven't created the issues. We're just there to manage it.
Great. And Nick, your comments on that?
Thanks, Jay. Yes, I want to come back to two things. Sean said a couple of valuable things there, as well as Richard and Andrew right now. Yes, we're looking at construction at various stages, or we're looking at project management and the various stakeholders, whether it's a developer, a design team, the contractor, as well as the facilities management. And Richard spoke about digital twins. And like I said, maybe I oversimplify what project management is. And it boils down to what we do, where we do, and when we do it, and at what stage, pre-construction, during construction, after construction. It always boils down to why we do it. And I think the primary reason why we do things is it is for the people, whether it's public or private investment or development. It is for people, to house them, to school them, to take care of them, etc. We live our whole lives, and that happens in a physical location, which happens to be our built environment. Now, it resides either it definitely is physical. We can see how it is impacted around us and what's happening around us, particularly now with COVID, and it drives us, our physical presence being in our homes perhaps. And the point I want to make is that whole value chain, and Sean mentioned the silos. We need to bridge those silos across each phase of the construction phase or the project phase. And all these projects boils down to an overall project portfolio. They all happen at different stages and at different impacts and different drivers. But the bottom line is for the people, and the tech is for the people as well, for all the stakeholders involved in the project. And I think that's the primary driver. And tech, yes, it is available, but perhaps not to everybody. Very expensive for many. Dealing with smaller contractors, larger contractors, different stakeholders in the industry. I would just like to challenge the rest of the panel to maybe make comments on that as well.
Nick, I think you hit a nerve there, because I've just seen hands going up like crazy. So let's go to Vere first. Your opinion, Vere?
I think my opinion would be exactly what everyone has said, which is just the thought that now more than ever, we need to increase on efficiencies. That's efficiencies in design, in construction, in commissioning, in maintenance, and in demolition, which actually should be deconstruction. And so I love the thoughts that everyone has shared around green, and just bringing it back to just, there was the comment earlier about the cost of green. So there are studies that show that it can go as low as 1.1% if it's integrated correctly and from the beginning. But I do think that ways in which we can get efficiencies post-pandemic, get everyone speaking to each other again, specifically with the silos that we speak about, is really looking at green as a means to doing that, and technology as an enabler of that. Yes, there is a digital divide, but I think, again, the digital divide comes when people just simply listen to suppliers try to sell them technology instead of having people sell them a solution. Because what happens is then you start onboarding all of this technology that looks amazing, is great, but it doesn't work in the particular context that you're in. So I do think that technology can be applied in every form of building in some way or another. And just a thought as well, because Andrew's mentioned quite a bit about how facilities managers inherit a building. I mean, one of the things that we always talk about in green is to say that the facilities manager actually needs to sit in on design meetings. They need to be integral in the entire thing, because there's no point building a great building and it doesn't perform. So yeah, I don't know if that answers some of it, but I definitely think that yes, there's a digital divide, but every building can apply some form of technology in some way if they contextualize it.
Fantastic, and I agree. Richard?
So I'm going to take another left turn. Sorry, that's just how I do it. One of the things that we're missing in this conversation is the fact that in future, everything we do is going to be different. So the kids coming out of school now, they've all got iPads, right? And they're all learning how to work digitally with pretty much everything they do. We shop online, we date online. So we need to be able to manage our assets online. We need to understand our built environment online. The kids that are going to be graduating in 20 years' time that are going to take our jobs, they're not going to want piles of paper to wade through. They're going to want to have connected assets and systems that can run the infrastructure to make society a better place. And today is the time we've got to be implementing these systems. So yes, I'm totally for keeping the planet healthy. That's a given. But I think what we've become so caught up in so many other things that we forget that every other aspect of our lives has catapulted ahead, but concrete and steel and the buildings and the roads and the water treatment works that we depend on are still stuck in the Stone Age comparatively. So in addition to understanding survival and basic needs, we've actually got to get into a totally different mindset and understand that anything that we design today, if we're not designing it to be run effectively in 50 years' time, we're actually slipping up, and we're doing the next generation a disservice, because they're going to have to come back and redo what we didn't do. So I think this wake-up call that we've gotten with COVID, it's certainly, you know, taking people away from sending emails and rather going onto a shared file on SharePoint and those kind of things. I hope that that's also going to stimulate people to realize that our assets can and should be run in a different way in future, and we've got to start today.
Thanks, Richard. I think that leads us straight into me asking a question of Andrew. I know you were quite excited about some of various comments, as well as Richard's comments, and being able to manage these pieces of infrastructure and buildings for the next 50 years. Any comment from you?
Yeah, I coming from a project background myself, or at least it was one of the jobs I did in my multifaceted career, but I don't like this idea of we think of a project and You know, the first thing, Project 101, there's a start, a middle, and an end. And that, I think, constrains the thought process. Building an asset like a building is a story. It's a continuum. It's a life cycle. It doesn't necessarily have a start, a middle, and an end. Or if it does have an end, it's the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. So I think we need to think about our mindset there for a start. And this whole idea that which I gave her a big hurrah on the chat, this idea that the operators and the owners and the facilities managers as their advisors, and Patrick and the likes of people like Patrick and Sean need to get involved in the early stages. You know, the design and construction, the code of practice for asset management calls for the involvement at the design stages of owners, representatives, and operators. And clearly, you know, if the majority of the cost of a building over its life cycle is in the operating phase, to not have an operator or an operator's representative or an owner's representative in those early design stages, in my view, the design team is failing in their duty of care to their client. And you can't, and I've heard this, so you can't blame the client for not bringing his operator along, because he doesn't have the knowledge. As the trusted advisor, whether that's the principal agent, architect, the engineer, whomever it may be, I honestly believe they're failing in their duty of care not to get an operator, or at least an independent, if you haven't chosen an operator by that stage, involved in the earliest stages of the design process.
Very, very interesting comment there. Ginika, your side?
Yes, I just want to say thank you to everyone, because everyone has just spoken about something that I have been very passionate about, and it is also something that we all know has plagued the industry for a while. You know, speaking about silos, speaking about having a more integrated team, but I want to take a slightly different approach to say, at this very moment, what have we learned about our industry, and what can we do going forward? So when we speak about the pandemic, it's not just the pandemic, but the lockdown in itself has forced the entire industry to be thrown into the digital world. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there were construction projects that were ongoing before the lockdown, and as soon as the lockdown was enforced, we were all forced to all go online. I think this has been a very good opportunity to stress test the technology that we have as a collective. So, for example, previously, people saw investing in technology as a nice to have. The conversation of construction having the potential of adding, I think, 1.6 trillion. I read a McKinsey report that spoke about $1.6 trillion in productivity gains in terms of what we could potentially add globally. And if we could bring things like technology, reshaping regulations, they listed 7 different things or 6 different things that we as an industry needed to do to be able to gain about $1.6 trillion in productivity gains globally. But what COVID has done now is it has taken the discussion from a nice to have to a discussion of, okay, we really need to innovate. We really need to collaborate. And when we speak about integrating the design process or integrating the entire process from design all the way down to FM, the best platform or enabler of that is when we all go into the digital world. I think that forces us to come together as a team and to be able to meet each other in real time without it being different silos or different aspects of the process. And such platforms that enable that is your BIM. I would also like to challenge the businesses within the construction industry to also assess their readiness, technology readiness as we come out of the lockdown to say, okay, we've all had to go online. Does our current systems, our current processes, our current ways of executing projects truly serve us, in terms of what we've invested in? Do we have the right systems? Do we have the right platforms? Do we know how to work together on integrated or in a common data environment? Do we know how to use these technology available that we've spent money on, whether they've spent a lot of money or they've not spent enough money? This is a time for us as an industry to really see what technology we have and to really see how ready we are to move on to the next phase. So if we were to reimagine this lockdown 10 years from now, for example, and we had advanced robotics or advanced development in robotics, maybe having like I've seen articles speaking about having exoskeletal technology where a construction worker puts on this gadget that makes him 10 times stronger, so he's half caterpillar or half forklift, half man, I don't know. Would we be able to do everything online? So the point I'm trying to make is to say that this particular lockdown has forced our industry to analyze where we are in terms of the readiness, our digital readiness. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
No, perfectly, completely understand and agree. Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. I think, good points made so far. Just touching on something that Vere mentioned around creating the right technology that becomes a solution, right? Rather than having the technology that is a product. And I think there's a lot of room for that. And I give a basic example. We look at Zoom and how Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype have shot through the roof in terms of utilization during this lockdown. Now, once the lockdown is over, will we continue using these platforms, or will we be going back to having engagements and meetings on a face-to-face basis? I think our industry, especially from an occupier, from a real estate perspective, it's a very face-to-face business. So I think we will be going back to having meetings in cafes and restaurants and boardrooms, because it has a lot of value add when you've got that face-to-face interaction. Now, that doesn't mean that Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype and the likes are terrible platforms. They're fantastic platforms, but they come in handy when we are unable to execute in our normal way of doing business. And I think there's room to come up with such technological solutions right across our industry, and these would be solutions that allow us to continue to be operational even when we are outside of the ordinary.
Very, very good points. Nick?
Yes, thank you for everybody's input so far. It's really interesting, and Richard mentioned earlier on about our new normal, or embracing the new normal. Next week, most contractors are starting to gear up to get back onto site, taking in consideration all the health and safety aspects that come with this new normal, which is really going to impact on the productivity of our projects to get them up and going. And Patrick just mentioned, yes, we're going into Zoom, we can do things digitally, but from a contractor's perspective, we're dealing with a reality on site, the physical that still needs to be constructed. Ginika spoke about the common data environment, and what I'd also like to put out there is the early involvement of contractors in the early stages of a contract to be able to facilitate that seamless interaction, to get return on investment. I mean, after all, time is money. And often we see projects running late, various reasons, and the impact of that. And one of the big impacts is obviously local communities and how that affects the physical project. And just to consider the difficulties they're going through currently. And then robotics and you know, we can't do things the way we used to do it anymore. We can't use labor-intensive methods anymore. The need far outweighs what we can provide at the moment. And we're going to need to go into more advanced technology, similar to what they're using overseas, and manufacturing things and erecting it. You just take Wuhan, for example, building a hospital in a week, 10 days. That kind of interaction that's required and the planning that goes behind that for the resource management, you can only achieve that if all the stakeholders are involved at an early stage through the whole value chain. And we separate the silos with that interaction, and it boils down to the communication. So it's all about the data and the communication. Technology is the means to look at it differently. And a 4D is going to become far more important in years to come. Yeah, that's basically what I want to share for now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. Andrew, I see you had your hand up.
Now, let me just unmute myself. I want to go back to Patrick's comment around, you know, the face-to-face, the coffee shop comment. And yeah, sure, remote working is going to be great. And we know that that doesn't have a huge penetration in the South African market for lots of economic and social reasons. But I just want to recognize that, you know, we're talking about lockdown, but plenty of my colleagues have been working during this time because they're delivering services to essential services, hospitals, telcos, power utilities, etc. And FM have been the frontline workers. And, you know, the very definition of service is a person-to-person product. It's not necessarily a business-to-business. I mean, it gets measured at a business-to-business level, but it is very much a person-to-person. So, you know, the ability for certain elements of the construction industry to not be able to work remotely because of constraints is almost the opposite end of the scale. At the other end of the timeline is that FMs really need to be on those sites, maintaining those buildings, maintaining the lifts, maintaining the boilers, maintaining all of those things that I suppose before COVID we often took for granted. I mean, the recognition of our health workers has been long overdue. I think now we're talking about schools reopening. The recognition of our teachers has been long overdue. And the people that support those people are the FMs. And I know that's just my little soapbox bit, but remember the guys who are in the basement in the boiler house, because they're the people that keep that going. And remote working for them is not a possibility for different reasons than it is potentially in the construction industry.
Great. Richard, you also had your hand up before as well.
Yeah, so that was my previous comment, but thanks for giving me the mic back. Just in terms of bringing all these things together, I think the recurring theme when we look at all the ways that technology intersects with built environment, intersects with operations, really the common theme is planning. I've realized that, you know, all these clever things that we talk about won't ever happen by accident. It takes a really strategic thinker to get all of the pieces aligned ahead of time, in time, to eventually deliver a project that is connected. And I think that quite a few of us have actually mentioned that. We've got to be much better at collaborating up front. We've got to understand that good ideas and sustainable ideas are co-created. It requires collaboration between a number of different parties. And certainly in the reading that I've been doing recently, the involvement of the operations and maintenance people during design is the only way that a BIM model is going to be coded correctly. For example, University of Cambridge recently did a study where they underestimated the amount of complexity in putting together a BIM model that would be ready for an asset information model. And so their output was actually a step-by-step process of collaboration to bring the stakeholders' inputs together so that when the BIM model was created in the first place, it would afford the opportunity to take that into operations. I also think that one of the things that no one's been talking about is software and applications and the tools that need to still be developed to enable a lot of these interfaces to work. Conceptually, I think we all have a very clear idea of how digital systems could make these things work. But when you really dive into the details, it's a tricky thing. And I think there's still a lot of development that needs to happen there, Jay.
I agree 100% with you. Patrick, as owners really have the control of changing the way we take this forward by demanding certain deliverables and demanding that we need to bring people, more stakeholders in earlier into the design. What is your sort of feedback on the whole scenario of involving more people, and why does it feel that, you know, owners of these type of projects have been loath to invest and drive the whole conversation around BIM? Is it because the way we work on an ROI on a project stops at the end of the story where we think it stops, or do they not look at a long enough horizon? What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it's a historical issue. The issue being that, you know, building all the way up to 2010 and even right up until 2015, we were in a cycle whereby, you know, a developer will build and he would have a guaranteed tenant, right? It was the build it and they will come scenario. So occupiers of space and tenants had limited say and limited influence in terms of how buildings needed to be constructed. They had limited influence on topics such as sustainability or even just operational flow and the likes. They were forced to utilize the space that was provided to them. However, as you know, few developers became more savvy in terms of attracting tenants, other developers and construction companies started flowing. But it's been a very slow integration and a very slow change. And I think we're now at that point where there's a bit more negotiation and discussion before a development commences. However, the developers that sit on cash often just start, usually because they want to secure the property, or it could be a defense mechanism, right? So they build before the competition builds, and the building then does not necessarily respond to what the occupier is looking for. And that then goes back to the previous discussion we had when it comes to refurbishing or retrofitting or trying to fix space to make it respond to the occupier. So absolutely, there's a room for collaboration. And I think that's where technology comes into play as well. You know, with 3D, 4D, I mean, we're talking about 5D now. You know, you're able to design or at least allow an occupier to visualize the space that they will be operating in before spending a cent. And, you know, when I look at how this solution has developed, I don't think that it has been absorbed at the rate which it can be.
Very interesting. In a book by a professor at one of the universities in the US that looks called the owner's dilemma. They make a very important point, and they said that three particular elements of the industry provide tangible barriers to innovation: fragmentation, which we spoke about; inertia, which we also spoke about, the lack of change; and lastly, with the lack of knowledge creation, they mentioned as the third pillar in this. So, take into account what we all said, and that we should never waste a good crisis, as Winston Churchill was heard quoting. Where to next? How do we not waste this? Richard.
I knew you were going to pick on me. I think step one in not forgetting something or not moving away is to actually capture it and document what's working. One often emerges out of a crisis with a sense of relief, and you desperately want to rush back into the way things were or rush ahead into a dream. I think it's important for us as an industry to take stock and to have these type of conversations to say what is actually working now. We've mentioned a few things in this conversation. Now is when our thoughts are stable. We've got time. We've got a bit of a hiatus in the busyness to say how do we want it to be different. And I think that that's going to be important for us, is to just reflect and keep track of these ideas, and then hold each other not accountable, but remind each other of the things that we thought during COVID, and say, we thought this was a good idea then, why aren't we doing it now? There's nothing worse than going around in circles and reinventing the wheel for the umpteenth time. And I think that that's the challenge for us. We've realized that we need to make a change in our industry. We've realized that the same old isn't going to cut it. So now we need to take stock, take some decisions, and act.
Fantastic thoughts. And I think that leads us to closing remarks from each of you. And I'll start on the left with Sean. As we take stock and look at this, what are the important questions we should ask itself? So if everybody could think of something like that, and as we go through those. Sean?
Thanks, Jay, and thanks for a great discussion. A lot of really good points raised. I think on my side, there was just some comments going in our chat, and I think there's a lot of talk about the new normal, but perhaps we need to think about the old normal, not sort of with not romanticize it, because obviously there's a lot of things we miss, but the sort of the main goal shouldn't be to get back to normal as soon as possible, but perhaps see where things were operating before that weren't quite as good as they could be. So I guess on my side, would just be to use the opportunity and the new perspective, because I think, like Richard said, it does give you a chance to step back and look at things differently, and just to acknowledge that there are new options out there, and that there is a chance now to perhaps look at doing things differently. And there's a big need, obviously, that we need efficiencies, like have been mentioned a few times, and there are tools out there that perhaps previously there were a number of challenges and barriers that stopped organizations or individuals looking at new tools, etc. Number one being economic pressure and difficult markets, etc. But perhaps just using the chance to step back and think about how the old normal isn't really the way forward. That's my bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. Ginika?
So my closing remark would be that I think this lockdown, specifically the lockdown, has thrown the built environment or AEC companies into seeing what our enabling and seeing what technology that we currently have and how effective that technology can support us if we were to migrate to a digital economy. I know right now there are certain aspects of the construction industry that is not ready to be done completely remotely or to be done by robots. And when they speak about the advancement of technology in construction, or when you read reports or research on things like that, we have to bear in mind that certain economies or certain parts of the world would be a lot faster in adopting those technology, and certain parts like our part of the world would take a lot longer to adopt those advancements. So I think that this lockdown has just been a great stress test to see what we have, to see what we can do better using technology, and eventually that would also lead to, you know, working in more sustainable ways, reducing the amount of waste, whether it's in our carbon footprint or just time waste. So this lockdown has shown us where our strengths are and our weaknesses are with regards to technology. I think businesses should take advantage of this insight that they should be able to have gained through this lockdown, to say, okay, we need to invest more in the current software. So when I speak about technology in this case, for businesses is to be in the software that they have, and to really pay attention to it. Vere touched on this for a bit when she spoke about technology being sold to us as an IT tool instead of actual solutions solving real life problems. So businesses need to invest a lot more in their technology or software, but from a solution perspective. And as a whole, as well as an industry, we also need to see that we also need to realize that collaboration or collaborating is not such a difficult thing. I think we should be able to realize that from this lockdown, that collaborating in common data environment is not such a difficult thing to do, or working in such environments is not so difficult, and that should lead us towards a more integrated way of working and reduce the silos. That's it from me. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Ginika. Nick.
Hi, Jay. Thank you very much to everybody. It was very interesting. I'm just going to keep it simple. I think we've got various challenges. The only barriers is ourselves to be able to interact with one another. We're going to have to reinvent ourselves, how we operate, how we think, how we interact, and let's change the built environment to have a better environment for everybody. I look forward to the challenges and look forward to working with various people. Thank you.
Thanks. Richard.
Every single person in the value chain is going to have to do their job well. And each of us have got something to contribute, right from the beginning in design through construction into operations, the advisory pieces, the decision-making, the planning, and we've all got to pull together. And that's truly the essence of collaboration. It's not just talking and sharing ideas, but it's working together and making sure that each one of us does our job well.
Thank you. Vere?
I would say from my side, completely agree with what Sean said. I don't want a new normal, because the old normal wasn't normal to start off with. We were not environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable. And so I would say that just from this pandemic, what I hope we'll take away from it, because it's not really an opportunity, because millions of lives getting lost isn't an opportunity, but what we can hopefully take away from this crisis and how we've approached the coronavirus pandemic is the need for us to have a green recovery, to really incorporate green in how we build and how we manage and how we operate, how we deconstruct. And so I would just say as a closing remark that I think if we just redefine what green is, again, green is all about performance. And if it's about performance, it needs to be measurable. And if it needs to be measurable, we need technology. We need BIM and green and technology and the economy to be more integrated if we're really going to have a sustainable construction sector.
Thank you, Vere. Patrick?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I think from an occupier's perspective, of course, the big question that the pandemic brought about was or is, how much space do I actually require, whether it's from an office or from a warehouse logistics perspective. And the next question to that from an office perspective is, do I need 100% of my staff in the office, or is there a portion of it that can work remotely, right? And how do I equip them to continue working remotely? At the end of the day, it boils down to where are you most productive, because not everyone is productive away from the office. And this will change the way offices are designed. I think offices will become melting pots of ideas and opportunities, right? I think the one positive, let me put it like that, that has come out of the pandemic is when we go back to the office, it can't be, sit behind your desk as usual, because not everyone will be mandated to be in the office. So when you go back to the office needs to be an environment that allows you to engage, an environment that allows you to be creative. So it touches a lot on design. And I think there's a greater opportunity as well for the office space to be a lot more sustainable. And, this pandemic is a little wake-up call. I'm really glad that it's not something that will remain with us for forever and ever. We are finding ways to contain it and to live and operate whilst it's over us. And there's good lessons to be made. And there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you, Patrick. Andrew.
Yeah, in closing, I just want to just pick up on one thing that Patrick says. I mean, this overuse of the word office, and I understand why that is, but I'd rather use the term workplace, because every building is a workplace for somebody, whether it's a train station, a theatre, a stadium, a hospital. Those are not offices. And as FMs, we see how those workplaces affect people. And as Churchill said, we shape buildings and they shape us. So the return to work is obviously the big thing on everybody's mind, with hopefully going to lockdown 3 on the 1st. What's those perennial buddies of health and safety? What was healthy is no longer safe, like holding the handrail going down the stairs. What was safe is no longer healthy, and what was healthy is no longer safe. There's been a lot of talk in the press over the last probably 10 years about the future of work, and a lot of people have pontificated on the death of the office. The office is not dead, and it never will be dead. It might change a lot, but the future of work is the future of the worker. All organizations have to take into consideration their people, whether that's workplace experience, wellness, culture, etc. And just to close off, I'm reading again at the moment, Simon Sinek, as he calls himself, The Infinite Game. And he talks about this balance of resources and will. In innovation, this is not what he said, but in innovation needs a shortage of resources. And that's where we are at the moment. And that's where innovation is going to come from, as Ginika and Vere have both said. But I would always suggest that will always trump resources. If you've got all the resources in the world and you've got no will to change, then nothing will happen. If you've got the will to change, but you've got a shortage of resources, change can still happen. So if we keep the will, we can never blame a shortage of resources. And I think we need just to keep that in mind. And I think that sort of alludes to what Richard was saying. Thank you, everybody.
Fantastic. Yeah,
Great.
I agree, Andrew. Guys, thank you. With that, we're going to end off this episode of In Conversation with the BIM community. Thank you once again for everybody taking some of your valuable time tonight to have this conversation. I certainly think there's a lot more material for us to unpack the silos and a lot more conversations to be had amongst the different stakeholders as we explore project delivery and perspectives that we have not yet had the opportunity to explore. So with that, Thank you once again, and good evening and good night.